and in the awareness that God is present now, let us pray. Father, Mother God, we give thanks. We breathe into that phrase, we give thanks. Feel how that feels to truly, sincerely believe in the giving of thanks. And in this awareness of gratitude, oh God, we are blessed, we are lifted, we are transformed by the awareness that the universe is kind. The universe is conspiring for my good. Feel that. The universe is conspiring for my good. And we give thanks. And for those in our experience who seem to have a need for the awareness that the universe is conspiring for their good, we hold them in consciousness. We see them blessed. We see them transformed. We see them lifted by the power of your love. And for this opportunity to be messengers of your word, we give thanks. And so it is that together we say, Amen. Well, the only thing we have to fear last week I spoke of prosperity in the context of Earth Day and the importance of realizing that we are present on this earth and we have an impact on this earth, and that our consumers, our consumption, our consumerism is a very important part of the, has a very significant impact on this planet. And I spoke of the prosperity gospel as espoused by many evangelicals. And I want to also point out, and it was pointed out to me afterwards, that there is a movement within the evangelical movement that is very concerned with the stewardship of this planet. And there is, it brings forth an interesting partnership between the stewardship theology of some evangelicals and the environmentalists, that there is a shared interest in ensuring that this rock that we live on is habitable for many generations to come. So the importance of being aware that we are stewards on this planet, stewards of the planet, comes from a number of different passages within the Old Testament, and it's not my purpose here to review those. But if you decide to Google environment stewardship Old Testament, you'll find a number of different passages that you might want to consider. I mentioned in that talk this idea of profane prosperity. Profane prosperity is where our intention is to grab for all that we can get and not pay attention to the impact that it has on those around us and on this planet. And I will address what I've chosen to call sacred prosperity as opposed to profane prosperity. Sacred prosperity is that prosperity where we are not in it for ourselves only. Certainly we are in it to enjoy the wonder and abundance of this planet and what the universe has to offer us, but we also are concerned about how we can use our prosperity to help others, to help this planet. So that sacred prosperity is one that I'd like to talk about today. There is one moment, please. Thank you to whoever put that water up there. I didn't realize I was going to need it until just then. So, there's nothing to fear but fear itself. That comes from FDR. Yeah. It comes from his...
President Roosevelt.
Yeah. The first inauguration of President Roosevelt. Remember what was happening at the time. 1932, FDR was elected. He was campaigning against Herbert Hoover. Now, this is not going to be a political talk. I'm setting the stage here. He was campaigning against Herbert Hoover, and the country was in the midst, the depth of depression. Families were going hungry. They were uprooting themselves and moving to some place where they heard rumors that there was a job, right? The unemployment was sky high. That we had famine in the land. That happened to be also the Dust Bowl days. There was an endemic fear among the whole population that the prosperity that was realized in the teens and 20s had come to an end, and there was no route out. Well, FDR shared this from this is his first passage in his inaugural address. So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance. That, it turns out, is an assessment that we can use in our own lives. How many of you have concerns about, well, anything? Concerns about relationships, or concerns about finances, or concerns about career, or concerns about your neighbor, or concerns about anything? Those concerns arise out of a deeply felt sense of insecurity, a deeply felt sense of fear. And whether you call it a frustration or you call it a flaming rage, that whole spectrum of emotion is based upon fear, a deeply sensed fear that we have, that we're not good enough, that we don't have enough, that we don't have the opportunities that others have, that just name it. All of our pain arises from fear. Even our grief arises from fear. And so when we look at this condition that we have that is so based in fear, then the solution to relieving our unhappiness, to moving into a state of joy and happiness, would be what?
Love.
Get rid of fear. Get rid of fear. And indeed, love is a prescription to do that. There is, on our spiritual journey, the obstruction that we have in our spiritual journey is fear. That is our sole obstruction. Coming to the realization of our oneness with each other and with God. Remember Jesus' great commandments. Love God with all your heart. Love your neighbors as yourself. The obstruction that we have to that realization is fear. And so if we can rid ourselves of fear, then we can move into an experience of love, happiness, joy, excitement, enthusiasm. We can wake up in the morning with gusto. What is this universe going to provide to me today? As opposed to, oh my God, I'm out of coffee. So this idea that we have one obstruction along our spiritual path, it would seem that coming to this experience of constant and consistent happiness would be easy. Yet there is this ongoing thing. You know, we come up, we bubble up to this experience of, oh boy, this really feels good. You know, I'm seeing the world, I'm seeing my connection to it, I'm seeing my connection with the universe, and then something happens, right? You get a call. You run across someone in the grocery store. They tell you their tale of woe, and you suddenly feel their tale of woe, and your empathy, while empathy is a wonderful trait to have, your empathy will allow you to move into their fear and share their fear with them instead of being a remedy for their fear. You take on their fear. And that can happen whether it's, it usually happens when you are in a close relationship with someone. But the idea that we have this opportunity to rid ourselves of fear is something that it just doesn't come to the front of our awareness very often. So that's what I'd like to talk to you about today. One of the things that we have with this idea that FDR offered us, that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. When we realize that fear is only a temporary condition, it only has to be a temporary condition, a condition that is only as long-lasting as our lack of awareness, that when we turn ourselves to the realization that we have the choice to be fearful, we have the choice to accept our great good, we have the choice to accept our happiness and our joy in this moment. When we are willing to accept that as a possibility, then we can experiment. We don't have to be imprisoned by this fear. And again, I point out that fear can be anywhere from a frustration to a rage. This A Course in Miracles refers to this fear as the primary tool that the ego has to ensure that we stay in this sense of separation from each other and separation from God. And it is the separation from each other and separation from God which is really keeping us from our joy. It is the joy that we experience when we have the connection, when we sense that connection with another person, or we sense the connection with the all that is all. And that might arise when we're standing on a mountain peak looking across this panorama of beauty. It might arise when we are sitting on the couch and our dog comes up and begins nuzzling and appreciating this unconditional love that this animal is offering to us. It might arise when we look into the eyes of another person. I find it particularly engaging when I look into the eyes of a young child, and that engagement, that connection gives is one that I'm blessed by, I'm lifted by, I'm transformed by. So, fear being the obstruction to this, to the spiritual journey, we look upon the advice that Jesus offers us, and we see in Matthew 14. This is perhaps the most commonly known passage. Immediately, he made the disciples get into. Now, this is right after he has spoken with the 5,000. Okay, he has delivered the address to the 5,000, and immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but by this time the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning he came walking towards them on the lake. But when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified, saying, "It is a ghost!" And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And Jesus said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came towards Jesus. Notice that he was walking on the water. Until he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened and beginning to sink. He cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" Okay, so that walking on water story is one that is known to most of us. Now there is the book of Matthew. You may recall the book of Matthew was written about 50 years after the crucifixion of Jesus. The book of Mark was written somewhere in the neighborhood of 35 to 40 years after the crucifixion. The book of Mark was the first to share this story of walking on water, or the quieting of the storm. In Mark 4, 35 to 41, on that day when evening had come, and again, this was after Jesus had spoken to the crowd, but this is Mark's capture of that event. He said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat. He didn't go up the mountain to pray. He went with them in the boat. Other boats were with him. A great gale arose, and the waves beat into the boat. And so the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" Jesus woke up and rebuked the wind, said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. He said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him?" All right, so these are two different versions of the calming of the storm. One included the walking of the water. The other had Jesus in the stern of the ship, asleep on a cushion. So we draw from this, it's likely that those were considered to be the same story in the eyes of the writer. But Matthew decided that it would have a greater impact on his audience. And Matthew's audience was the Jews, okay? He was writing to the Jews. And so he wanted to have a greater impact of the power of this divine person on earth by having him walk on water. But here we have, in both of these cases, we have this concept that it is your fear that causes you concern. It is your fear that causes you stress. It is your fear that you need to be aware you have a choice. You don't have to be afraid. That's the essence of these stories, is you don't have to be afraid. And if that is so, if you don't have to be afraid, then the question arises, why? Why are we? Why are we afraid? Why are we afraid of the disastrous things that might befall us, when in fact those are still just a figment of our imagination? Why are we so afraid of the conditions that surround us, of the relationships that we're in, of the conditions of our finances? Why are we so afraid? As you know, over the course of the last, what's it been, about 6 months, 7 months, 8 months? Starting in July, so that's 9 months, last 9 months, we've been having this capital campaign for our parking lot repair, resurfacing. And So we have had the contributions from all of you and from others as well, but the contributions from all of you have given us about $10,400, $10,375, I think is the current total, that are going towards the repair of the parking lot. But we still have another of 10,300. I've been negotiating with the vendors. It looks like we have the opportunity now to get 4 inches of asphalt out here for about $23,000. And so we still have, if you will, $13,000 left to go. So last weekend, I was sitting there pondering, well, you know, we have these ties that we have been not caught up on. We're 2 months behind in our payment of tithes. And I said, you know, the time is right. Let's get caught up here. Let's pay these tithes. It amounted to about $1,800 total for the 2 months. And so I paid those tithes. Now, you also know that we have had an application in for funding for the remainder. I asked for $12,000 to be funded by Unity Worldwide Ministries Help Unity Grow Fund, the HUG Fund. And so that application's been in now for about 5 weeks. And I had placed a call in a week and a half ago to find out what the status of that application was. And the board was in process of reviewing it, and I would be notified as soon as the board meeting was concluded. Well, the board meeting was concluded, and it was another 4 or 5 days. I hadn't heard anything, and I was starting to be a little bit concerned. You know, does this mean that we were not approved? So I put some feelers out to people on the board that I knew, and they were kind of hesitant about giving me feedback because, you know, that was board business and notification was going to come through normal channels. So I finally heard on Tuesday that the application had been approved, but it was not for the amount that we wanted. It was for $11,460. I have no idea how they came to that number instead of $12,000, but maybe they just wanted to let me know that you know, I can't just go to them and ask them for any sum of money and we would automatically get it. I don't know, but nonetheless, we did get approval for $11,460. So that brought us up to $21,800, getting really close. And then Thursday came around. How many of you paid attention to what the bingo earnings were on Thursday of this last week? Thursday of this last week, the bingo earnings were as high as they have been, with the exception of one instance some 4 years ago. We had $3,680 in bingo earnings on Thursday. Now, we had eight people there. Thank you, each and every one, because we had 157 players. We needed 8 people there. But when you consider the amount of time that our bingo volunteers put in, we had 8 people, almost $3,700. That's, if you will, $450 per volunteer for the time they spent in the bingo session. You see, I'll just make a note that the bingo volunteers have a very direct impact on the financial health of this ministry because of their dedication to coming and doing their part on a regular basis. Some people are there once a month. Some people are there 2 weeks a month. Some people are there 4 weeks, 5 weeks a month. But each and every person has a significant impact. Nonetheless, one of the things that we have going for us as individuals is that we have the opportunity to either fear or not fear. It is up to us. One of the most significant fears that we have is a fear of lack of financial security. So when we have something that we are fearing, it's important for us to step up and address the fear. Oftentimes, that fear is addressed by actually doing that which we are fearful of. How many of you saw George H.W. Bush some 4 or 5 years ago? A photograph of him with an instructor strapped to his back, and he was in free fall. Did you see that? He had wanted to feel the experience of parachuting. And what was he at the time? 85, I think. I don't know. He was an old fart. He decided, you know, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. And he did it. What a wonderful experience that must have been for him to jump out of this airplane. Now, he had, in fact, been a pilot in World War II, so I'm sure that during that training he had the experience of jumping out of an airplane. But it was such this broad grin on his face as he was falling through the sky. Inspired me almost to want to do that. But addressing the fear that we have is an important way of overcoming the fear. Stepping out there and doing it. And in that stepping out and doing that, it's not about making some kind of contract with the universe. It's not about daring the universe, okay, I'm going to do this. Kill me if you must, but I'm going to do this. It's not about that. It's about changing our consciousness. Our fear is based in our consciousness, and it's about changing our consciousness. The Course in Miracles talks. I'm not to the Course yet. This addresses our financial fear. The fear that we often have is, how am I going to make it? You know, how am I going to survive my bank account? So in Malachi 3, 8 to 12, I want you to look at this, and I want you to look at this not as a command, but rather as advice. Okay? Look at this as advice. Will anyone rob God? Yet you are robbing me. This is from the voice. This is written in the first person of God. But you say, how are we robbing you? In your tithes and offerings, you are cursed with a curse, for you are robbing me. The whole nation of you. Bring the full tithe into the storehouse, so that there may be food in my house, and thus put me to the test, says the Lord of hosts. See if I will not open the windows of heaven for you, and pour down for you an overflowing blessing. I will rebuke the locust for you, so that it will not destroy the produce of your soil. And your vine in the field shall not be barren, says the Lord of hosts. Then all nations will count you happy, for you will be a land of delight, says the Lord of hosts. This book was written about 300, as far as scholars can figure, about 300 BCE, 300 years before the ministry of Jesus. And in that time, God was considered this vengeful being that was just waiting for us to step out of line so that we could be smitten. Yet Jesus brought this idea that it's not a vengeful God sitting out there waiting for us to step out of line, not someone that's waiting for us to make a good move in which we would be blessed or make a bad move in which we would be cursed. He brought with him this idea that this God that he's teaching is not a vengeful God. It is a loving God. It is a God that is here for our good. It is a God that is helping us move into a greater realization. Well, both gods are an anthropomorphic God. Both gods are a person out there, right? In the context of a person that is either satisfied or dissatisfied. And so here we have this passage that talks about bringing tithes into the house so that there will be food in the house. Does God need food? No, God doesn't need food. It's not about feeding God. What it is about feeding our own consciousness and relieving ourselves of a primary fear that we have, that fear that we don't have enough. I have had many instances in my career as a minister where I've had the opportunity to be fearful of the financial condition, the condition of our community as well as the financial condition in my own household. And I've found that whenever I have those fears, it is debilitating. It paralyzes me. It causes me to want to just curl up into a ball and say, I'm done. I'm not going to worry about this anymore. I'm just going to go over in my hole and I'm going to stay there. Well, that is that is something that arises out of fear. And going over into my hole and staying there doesn't relieve my fear, does it? I'm still curled up in a ball, although I'm over there in the hole. I'm still fearful. It doesn't relieve my fear. And what I found is that when I get into that and I think about how I am imprisoning myself in that fear that I'm holding, I realize, well, wait a minute, I know this stuff. This is the stuff I teach. This is the stuff I've learned over the past, and I've seen it demonstrated time and time again. I need to let go of that. And so it was last weekend as I was considering this question. Well, are we going to have enough funds to take care of the parking lot, and how are we going to handle it, and da-da-da-da-da-da. And I chose, okay, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to step out, and I'm going to commit these funds to our tithes that we have stated that we're going to commit to. And we got the funding for the parking lot. One could say, well, that was just coincidence that you were having the problems the week prior or the few days prior to finding out about it. We had a stellar Thursday night, and yeah, well, that could be coincidence as well. Well, yeah, but as soon as I wrote the tithe check, so I went online and wrote it, but as soon as I committed those tithes, my fear disappeared. It's not a contract with God saying, oh, I'm pleased with the fact that you've made your commitment to tithe as you said that you were going to. It's not about that. It's about changing my own consciousness. And in changing my own consciousness, I relieve myself of the fear. It's about changing consciousness. In A Course in Miracles, in the introduction, it says, this is a Course of Miracles. It is a required course. Only the time you take it is voluntary. Free will does not mean that you can establish the curriculum. It means only that you can elect what you want to take at a given time. The course does not aim at teaching of the meaning of love, for that is beyond what can be taught. It does aim, however, at the removing of the blocks to the awareness of love's presence, which is your natural inheritance. The opposite of love is fear, but what is all-encompassing can have no opposite. Thus, this course can therefore be summed up very simply in this way. Nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists, and herein lies the peace of God. My fear is my own manufacture. No one imposes my fear on me. I have chosen to be fearful. That's me. That's my choice. That's my decision. Someone can say, well, these are the conditions that you have to meet. And then I look at those conditions that are having to be met, and from that I might be fearful. But no one imposed the fear on me. It is only my reaction to it. And so this idea that we are in a place of desiring the freedom from fear, thinking that someone else is controlling that, is bogus. It's bogus. There is no fear that is imposed upon us. It is a fear that we take on ourselves. And how do we relieve ourselves of fear? Someone said it earlier, love. But it's not contractual love. It's not, I'll love you if you love me back, or I'll love you if you'll do that, or when you do that, I'll love you. It's not about that at all. But rather it is just allowing this love that is available to us all the time flow through us and express from us as unconditional love. I love you regardless. I love you regardless. In fact, I'm going to take it a step further. I'll love regardless. Doesn't have to be you. I'll love regardless. I'll love the moment. I'll love the conditions. I'll love the circumstances in which I am in, regardless of whether I previously I had been fearful of those conditions or I had been fearful of those circumstances. I will love unconditionally in this moment. And when you choose to do that, fear disappears. We'll have our meditation. As we come into our meditation, let us come in with I cast all my cares. As we settle into this moment, as we awaken in this moment, we awaken to the presence of love offered to us with no conditions, no constraints, and no limit. The love is offered to us unconditionally. And in this moment, awake, aware, feeling the presence of this unconditional love, we give it. We give it unconditionally. We give it without allocation. We give it without expectation. We give it here, now. We allow it to flow through us. We allow it to purify our being. We allow it to be in this moment complete. We allow it to touch each and every aspect of this moment, each and every inhabitant of this moment. We allow this love to move through us and out into this community. We see this love touching those who are on the street begging, those who are in their palaces rejoicing, those who are in pain, those who are in delight. We see this love moving and touching everyone without exception. We feel this love transforming our own consciousness. We feel this love dissolving the fear, dissolving the irritation, evaporating the rage. And in this realization, we also arrive at the awareness that we are blessed all the time. In that realization, we give thanks. And as we come back into this time and space, let us come back sharing the words of the Lord's Prayer.